Welcome to Art Talk with April. I'm April Harris. I'm the artist of Inked April, located in Birmingham, Alabama. And this podcast is going to be about all things art. We'll talk about books, invite some artists to interviews, and much, much more. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on Art Talk with April. And today we have one of my most favorite artists, Melissa Tubbs. She is a pen and ink artist. And where are you located now, Melissa?
I'm in Montgomery, Alabama.
Okay. So I just want to jump right into it. How did you start out being interested in art? And did you go to any kind of school or do anything like that?
I'm laughing because my mother had kept all my report cards and since kindergarten, it said Melissa finger paints well. So I've always been into art. Won some prizes in high school when I took art and that kind of thing. Always knew I wanted to be an artist. I went to Auburn and got a degree in visual design, which is more the graphic end, and spent 25 years working in the publishing field.
Okay.
And you'd be amazed at how most associations are headquartered in Montgomery because it's the capital city. And most of them have publications of one sort or another.
I mean, what do you mean by visual design at that time?
Well, most of the classes were graphically oriented, like you take a class that you had to come up with a logo and do ads for it. We had one project where we had to take something in history and come up with a visual representing what that was and that kind of thing. But also you had to take fine art courses. I had to take watercolor and acrylics and that. So it was a mix of fine art aspects, but like I said, geared toward graphic design because I figured I could always get a job in advertising or publishing or something like that. And then in 1991, my sister asked me to draw a pen and ink, specifically said pen and ink, drawing of her father-in-law's house. She needed a Christmas present for the man who had everything. And so I said, okay. And that took forever. It was the first one I had ever done. Really don't know why she specifically said pen and ink because she'd never seen me do one. Got it done. It was kind of like put a line down and go, oh, okay, where do I put the next one? Because, the little voice in the back of my head was saying, okay, you make a mistake, you can't erase it. So got that done. And then word of mouth, I got more and more commissions. And finally, after about 6 or 7 years, I either needed to find a way to get more time to do them between having a full-time job and doing that on the side or stop doing it. And I made the executive decision to quit my office job. And so I've been a full-time artist for about 25 years.
Oh, wow. And see, I empathize with that so much, being a graphic designer by day and artist on the side. So.
Right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's so funny that your sister specified pen and ink. Like, have you ever asked her, like, why did you suggest pen and ink out of all the things?
No, I've thought about it, but I figured she would either not be able to give me an answer.
Like, I don't know.
I'd be afraid to know the answer. No, not really. I just think maybe she saw pen and ink drawing of a home or something and asked me to do it. And, your family, all my life, my family has volunteered me to create art. And I think also they think I can do whatever art they need me to do, that kind of thing. So I think that probably entered into it some, but I did not realize how much I enjoyed drawing architecture until I drew it that first time, and how much I enjoyed the pen and ink, because I've always liked a challenge in whatever I'm doing. The only reason I could do a monthly magazine all those years was because each issue was different. There's different stories, different layout with ads and everything. Because if I had to sit and do the same thing over and over, day in and day out, I'd go crazy. Yeah. So pen and ink is definitely a challenge because you can't erase. You have to really think and concentrate about what you're doing. And I really enjoy tackling different subjects. Even if I'm drawing architecture, I've noticed there's always some aspect of it I've not ever had to draw before. So I have to figure out what direction to put the lines to show the volume and that kind of thing. And I love working in black and white because I love working with values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you really have to, with pen and ink, that was one of the things that I really loved. So that makes sense. Like just, finding those different, like the darkest values to the lightest values and being able to show, with just lines, the value of things.
Well, it still amazes me today that I can create the drawings I create with just lines,
Yeah.
But it's you get that practiced eye over time. I've always photographed my subjects in color because with black and white, the things that are in the darkest shadows tend to disappear.
Yeah.
And early on, I realized I work in 2.5, 3 hour increments, and then you have to take a break.
Yeah.
And each time I would come back and pick up the photo, I would notice things I hadn't noticed before in the deep shadows. And I think because my work shows the depth that it does, because I start out with basically what you might consider a contour drawing, getting the shapes correct and the perspective correct. And then I start layering in the lines, and I draw in everything that I can see in those deep, dark shadows. Because even though towards the end of completion of the drawing, I'm putting in the big shadows that end up making the drawing pop, you're still going to see that ghost image of what I've drawn before.
Oh.
Unless it's such a dark shadow that it's going to be obliterated anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's like, there is nothing in nature that is completely black. Only in graphic novels and advertisements do you have a flat black. And so when you put layer after layer on, you're still getting those little white specks between the lines. And for years, I had a hard time before they developed desktop publishing and scanners and all that stuff. I had a hard time getting a reproducible image of my work.
Yeah.
Because I even got a Polaroid portable developer and used a Polaroid line art film, which was specifically for line art.
Yeah.
And it still didn't do a very good job. The darkest areas look like blobs and that kind of thing. So now that we've got the scanners, when I scan it as a TIFF file, they're huge files, but they hold every little white speck, so that when you place that on a note card or whatever thing you're going to print, it doesn't become all solid black.
Yeah, that's so true. Your prints are just beautiful. I mean, it's working. Like
yes, thankfully.
Yeah, it's real. They really show very well. And a lot of times, you'll see artists that are doing things like that, and you just can't, they haven't figured out the formula, I guess, to make that look right, and you're right. And that's one thing where I've noticed too, that people are much more surprised when they see your artwork in person, like the original, and they're able to look at it close up, and they're able to see all those little lines and everything. They're like in awe because they know how much time and effort it took to create that. And it's such an experience in itself just to see it in person.
Right. Because there's so much detail, and I'm not trying to, my work has been called photorealistic, and it's not, because if you look at the way I draw trees, I don't draw all the little bark and everything. I do curved lines to show the volume and straight lines for the shadows. But it's because of the detail that, like I said, you get the depth.
Yeah.
And whether it's a painting or a drawing, no reproduction ever does justice to the original.
Yeah.
I have had people who commissioned me to draw their homes, or they buy a drawing of mine, and I'll see them later and they say, I love your work because every time I go by your drawing and I stop and look, I see something I hadn't noticed before.
Yeah. Yeah.
I drew a woman's house once, and she had kind of a set-in porch on the front, but to the side. Yeah. And she had a bench there, and she said, "Oh, you even put my bench in." And I said, "Well, it's all the details that are in your house that make it your house, your home, and not somebody else's."
Yeah.
So that's another reason for putting the detail in.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it more personalized. Why wouldn't you put the bench there?
Right.
I think that, that's just me. Like I've tried to do, I think I did a color pencil drawing for my grandmother of her house. And I mean, the way that you're able to capture like the perspective and the lines, and even some of the more historical architecture around Montgomery and college campuses and things like that, where, I mean, how do you do that?
I would say slowly and with my tongue in the right spot.
Yeah. Very carefully.
It is a slow process because of having to concentrate and think about what you're going to do next. Yeah. Because even while I'm drawing, I work on bits and pieces. I don't do one little spot completely and then move to another spot and then another spot, because it's also a process of adjusting. Yeah. So I'll put in, after I do the so-called contour part, I will start putting in the darkest shadows. That is just laying in the first layer or two to get a perspective for me on the darks and the lights. Yeah. And then I start putting in the in-between values. And as I do that, I know, okay, I've got to go back to this darkest area and put another layer or two of lines in it. So it will be darker than this area here. Yeah. And so it's constant adjustment and everything. And one thing I like when I'm not doing a commission or drawing buildings per se, I really like to hone in on a specific part of a building with its shadows and detail. You'd be amazed at how abstract that becomes, even though it's a realistic drawing. In fact, I had somebody several years ago say, your work is becoming more and more abstract. It's kind of like once I went to a critique and the person doing it gave Whistler's Mother, that painting, as an example of what is considered by many people one of the most abstract works of art there is. Yeah. Because of the placement of the rectangular picture to the side of her head and that kind of thing. So just because you are painting or drawing realistically does not mean you don't have that edginess of an abstract feel to it. With the way the shadows, big blocks of shadows go and that kind of thing. So I enjoy that about it too.
Yeah. And that's how, that's interesting you say that, because I've never thought of it that way. But when I think about drawing in pen and ink, I think when I'm working on it, I'm thinking of it that way. Like I'm drawing your shapes.
Right. Because the big shadows are shapes, the lightest areas are shapes. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're focusing on, even though you're drawing in realistically to make it look like what it is,
Yeah.
your mind is still seeing it as areas of shapes, darks and lights.
Yeah, you're right. That is so interesting. I have never thought about it that way. Now it makes me question, like, I want to go back and look at art history books and like, is that more abstract?
Yeah, it really does make you look at things differently.
Yeah.
I read a quote not long ago about, because I love to read about drawing. And in fact, right now I'm reading a book called Wayne Thiebaud, Draftsman. I like to read about artists that are mainly known for painting and see what their background as far as drawing is concerned. And he started out as a graphic artist and moved into painting. And the quote that I read is something like, bad painters can't draw well, but those who can draw can always paint. And it's true. If you look at Picasso, he was an excellent draftsman before he started exploding the body into bits and pieces, a nose up here and an eyeball down here and such. And so I'm finding that to be true about most good painters. I mean, Van Gogh, there's a great book called Van Gogh's Letters that I got because it's the first one I'd seen that has his paintings, but also a lot of his pen and ink drawings. I wasn't aware he did that much pen and ink drawing. Master of line. Yeah. Just like his paintings, you can see his brush strokes. I mean, his lines in the pen and ink drawings are wonderful. So I'm finding that quote to be very true. And it makes sense because no matter what you're doing, whether it's art or music or your business or anything else, you have to know the basics. You have to learn the foundations of what you're doing before you can start breaking the rules.
Oh, yeah.
If you know what something really looks like, when you have learned all that, then you can start putting a nose up here and a eyeball down here and a breast over there. And it still can make sense.
Yeah. Being really familiar with the subject enough that you can change it into something else, I suppose. You just really, that makes so much sense. Well, I'm learning a ton.
Good. That's one of my aims.
Well, so, I mean, you've done pet portraits, which to me are very like more contoury and like the fur and being able to capture that with the straight lines.
Right.
It's just amazing to me that you do that.
There again, it's the values. Your brain is always going to fill in what your eye sees. Mm-hmm. So if you get the values right and, make an attempt to draw it the way it looks, then it will work.
Interesting.
I've always been drawn to the more graphic mediums. I worked in colored pencil for a while, and then the pen and ink. I always felt like when I had a brush that it was pushing me away from the surface. And I didn't like that. And I think that's also one reason why I've always used drawing paper and not illustration board that a lot of pen and ink artists use, because anything stiff made me feel like I couldn't get close to it.
Yeah, I don't like illustration board either. It's something about the texture of paper and the nib of the pen that really makes, I don't know, especially when you're drawing lines like that, it gives you more control to feel that, for me personally. Illustration board is kind of slippery, isn't it?
Well, and that's supposed to be the best surface for pen and ink, to not have any texture so that the pen glides along.
I love the texture. I love having texture.
Well, I
not
like
a lot, but
a little bit of texture, fine texture.
Yeah.
And I've always used Strathmore Artist Paper 400 series drawing paper because one reason I selected it because the color of the paper, it's a very warm off-white, which looks great with the black of the ink.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was a cold white, it wouldn't draw the viewer into it as much as the warm white of the paper and the black ink. Medium surface because it has just a very little bit of texture. But when I do little 2.5-inch drawings, square, that I call tiny jewels.
Yeah.
And with those, I use the smooth surface because I ordinarily I use a 0.18 pen, which is very small. I started out using a 0.25. And then one day I thought, I wonder what it would look like if I used a 0.18 and would anybody notice the difference? So I did some drawings with the smaller point size. And at a group show opening, a friend, I saw her looking at my drawing and she turned around and came over to me and she said, okay, what are you doing different? And I'm going, yes, somebody noticed, even if it's only one person. And it gave a more refined look to it. It wasn't as coarse, even that small difference. And it's the same thing with the little 2.5-inch drawings. If I used a 0.18 on that size drawing, it would look like a 0.35 on a bigger drawing. Yeah. So I use a 0.13. And I realized that the pen tends to drag on the medium surface. And when I switched for those to the smooth surface, I didn't have anywhere near as much trouble with the pen. And I used Rotring isograph pens because they're not a true rapidograph. I hate rapidographs. I never could keep them going in school. I still have an empty box, shoebox full of dead pens that I never could get to work. I would spend more time trying to get them to flow than I could actually draw. And the beauty of these pens is very rarely, if I haven't drawn for a long time, I might have trouble getting it started. Otherwise, I can pick it up and start drawing. I don't want to have to worry about, are my tools going to let me down when I'm working? And that includes the paper and the pens.
I was going to ask you that, like what pens you use and that kind of thing, because I had the same experience with those. I was like, they're really difficult to take care of and manage just on their own. And then, you know, when you feel like making something, you don't want to be stopped in the middle of it because it's not working, you know, and you're like,
the afternoon cut.
You're talking about like having a shoebox full of dead pens. I have that too.
Well, I started out using Rotring Rapidoliners. They were the most wonderful pens in the world because, you know, true rapidographs have a flat point.
Yeah.
And these Rapidoliners had a rounded point. Oh. And the real beauty was when the ink cartridge and the pen point came together. When you ran out of ink, you bought the whole thing. Yeah. So you always had a fresh point. It wasn't sharp and dragging on the paper. And there was no air ever between the point and the cartridge. So there was no clogging at all. Yeah. And of course, Rotring sold that division of their company to Chart Pack many years ago. And Rotring manufactured them in Germany. Well, Chart Pack decided to quit making them. They said it was too expensive. And we all know that wasn't necessarily true because I think, as well as other people, they wanted to get rid of the competition for their pens. That's how good the Rapidoliner was. So then I had to find a new pen. And I found a Statler Mars, or is it Mars Statler? I always want to switch them around. But anyway, they had a comparable pen. The cartridge and the pen point was the same system. But the ink was not as dark. and it just sat on top of the paper.
Yeah.
Not that the Rapidoliner did not go in and feather in the paper, but you could see the difference, and the ink was denser.
Yeah.
Then they quit making that pen. It's kind of like, I've always said, it's kind of like when you find a shade of lipstick that you absolutely love, you know,
and that's your
a year later, they quit making it because you found one you like.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with pens as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it really is. Because, oh my goodness, I've tried several different things, but I use the Micron pens mostly now, if I do anything like that. How do you feel about those?
Well, I would use those if I was just sketching.
Yeah.
But they do not have a point size comparable to a 1/8 or a 1/3.
Yeah.
They don't have small enough points.
They have a 003 and a 005.
They're still not. I've tried.
That's not the same as, and then it goes to 001 and then 02.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't quite.
No, it's something about the way the point is made.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
And whenever I've bought one and tried it, I've not been as happy. It'd be less expensive. The road trains are not the cheapest pens that you can buy.
Yeah.
But to me, it's worth it to have one that the finished drawing looks as good as it does, and I don't have to fight the pen to get it.
Do you have some pens nearby that you can show us? Oh, like, this is really interesting. I wonder if people know what we're talking about.
Well, I learned.
Yeah.
But, this is the 1/8. I don't know how well you can see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
And the purple is the 1/3, and the red is the 1/8. And I don't know that you can tell the difference, but the 0.13 is definitely a slimmer point. But this one, you do refill the cartridge as it empties, but I've still not had any problem. Like I said, unless you leave it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's only so much you can ask of a pen. And if you ignore it for a long time, then it has a right to be hard to get restarted.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it would take a pretty long time for that to happen.
Right.
If you're using them regularly, then that's just not going to be an issue. Honestly, I don't think I've ever had an issue like that.
And it's not.
Yeah.
I can't even think of a time that I've not used one long enough to
stop it up.
Yeah.
So you've talked about how you have your little jewel paintings. What about, like, when you're doing these architectural works, are you working in a particular size, or does it just depend on what you're creating it for?
All of the above. I have, when I get commissions, I have different prices for different sizes,
Sure.
From a 6" by 9" up to 11 by 14".
Okay.
And of course, the larger ones are a lot more expensive than the smaller ones. I'm working on what I call my Palladio Project now. It's several years ago. I created a traveling exhibition called Celebration and Preservation. I started raising money to do it in 2008 when the bottom fell out of everything. And so it was 10 years later. I raised all of the money to do it, including getting the pieces framed and creating a catalog for it. And I was fortunate enough to meet Jay Lamar, who was director of the bicentennial celebration for the state.
Yeah.
And so she asked me to do it as an official bicentennial project.
Nice.
And so when I had that behind me, it built a little more momentum, and I got it finished, and it traveled around the state to 6 venues. And the catalog, I was very happy with the way the catalog turned out. So I did those drawings pretty much based on the size of the building. Like if it was a tall building, like the county courthouse in Macon County, I wasn't going to do it.
Yes.
But I did it like 12 by 9.
Yeah.
But then most of them could be 6 by 9. Now I'm working on a Palladio project. It's Andrea Palladio, Shaping American Architecture. And I'm doing 25 drawings, half of them are buildings in the U.S. and half of the villas that Palladio designed in the Veneto region, which is directly across from Venice. And then he designed some buildings in Venice too. And of course,
that's going to be
this is taking longer. It was supposed to start traveling last year. Now it will start traveling in 2023. I was supposed to go to Italy in May of 2020. That didn't happen. Now I'm supposed to go this May and to get the pictures I need of the villas, because I always prefer to work from my own photographs. So, and I'm doing the same thing. It's going to travel around. I'm creating a catalog. But for this one, I raised a good bit of money for it. But then I received an $18,000 Pollock Krasner Foundation grant, which was great. I can't choose just one. The 2 biggest successes were getting that grant, because that had always been a goal of mine, and creating and completing that first traveling exhibition of 25 drawings. Now I want to complete this Palladio project and get it done and go back to creating what I call my work, the things that I see that I want to draw, not because of something specific I'm doing. So and these I'm finding I'm doing a little bit bigger, because so many of the first buildings that were influenced by Palladio. Thomas Jefferson became a huge fan of Palladio's. He bought books early on. Palladio wrote the 4 books of architecture, and he bought that, and he loved his architecture. And Jefferson is one reason all of our government buildings have that grand look to them, the columns and everything, because he felt like that architecture should speak to the world that we're not some little new country, but this is who we are. So the White House and Monticello, James Madison's home in Virginia.
Oh, interesting.
And so I've done buildings from up to Washington and down the coast and south. Some buildings in Georgia and South Carolina. Some here in the state. I couldn't ignore Alabama. And so what the building is, again, kind of dictates, especially if they're real wide. They have to be a certain width so that they're not that deep. So, but some of them
makes sense.
Will be a more consistent size. I don't think any of them can be 6 by 9s, but maybe 8 by 10s. Again, it's going to depend on how I get a picture of the villas and those buildings. But I'm finding that with this project, they're a little bit larger, taking a little more time to do that kind of thing.
Yeah. The larger you go, the more. What is the largest pen and ink drawing you've ever done?
I got a commission. Client used to live in Montgomery and work in Montgomery. And he lives in Asheville now. And he wanted a picture of the Wetumpka Bridge, Big Graves Bridge. So I went to where all the newscasters go when they do a story from Wetumpka and got a photograph.
Perfect spot.
Yeah. And of course, it was before the tornado went through and demolished First Presbyterian Church. And he wanted it 25 inches. I ended up doing it 25 and a half inches by 11 and a half inches. But it really turned out very nicely. I was really happy with it. And any of the drawings that I've talked about, I know I've posted them all on my Instagram account. And if you go there and just enter search for Melissa B. Tubbs, it should bring up my account. I think that's easier than giving these crazy addresses for everything. And you can scroll through my posts and see the ones I'm talking about. You can see.
You have the Etsy too, right?
Right. I have an Etsy shop. And again, if you Google Melissa B. Tubbs, I've always done my publicity and marketing basing my name on Melissa B as in boy Tubbs. And so if you just went to Google and put in Melissa B. Tubbs, my website will come up. Most everything will come up.
Yeah.
But if...
Of course, I did my little Google search before our interview and looked around, and I mean, you're all over the place. So I watched a video from Montgomery Advertiser, I think it was like 2015, and you did a little drawing, and we're talking to them about it. And I mean, and so that is a huge success. Oh my goodness. I can't imagine having a traveling show. I mean, that is just, and getting, it's a grant. What was the name of it?
Pollock Krasner Foundation grant for 2019, 2020.
Wow.
The money was given to me in support of this Palladio Project.
Yeah.
So it's paid for a lot of the expenses incurred in working on it.
Sure.
The 2-year delay. That's another thing. I have eventually succeeded in most everything that I have tried to do. Not always, but it has taken a lot longer on occasion than I had hoped it would.
Yeah.
But always, that's another thing I can't emphasize enough. If somebody's just starting out or they're struggling, I say create the best work you can create. Never stop learning and growing as an artist, and persevere. This is a process and a journey.
Yeah, it really is. It's one of those things where if I can't remember, I was reading a book recently, I can't remember, but it was basically saying that a lot of people, they'll start drawing or start trying to make art, and as soon as they feel like it's not good enough or they can't do it, then they just put it aside. And I think the journey as an artist is to keep going. It's always about keep going and, figuring out, solving the problems along the way. And figuring it out for yourself, what it means for you, and then also what you want to make,
Right.
And that kind of thing. So would that be your biggest advice to give somebody who's just starting out, is to keep going and
strive at creating the best art that you can create, because you will continue to improve no matter how long you've been doing it. That's just the way it works. And never stop learning. If you stop learning, you stop growing. And you have to keep growing to keep creating good art.
Yeah.
And you have to persevere.
Yeah.
I had a friend who was an artist, quit her day job to be a full-time artist. She was a really good artist. And after 5 years, I found out she had gone back to an office job. And her husband said, well, she gave it 5 years. Well, I don't know anything you can go into with the idea, okay, if I'm not a big success in 5 years, I'll move on to something else. Nothing in life works that way.
Yeah.
You have to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my very favorite quotes is, by perseverance, the snail reached the ark. Does that not present the most amazing mental image?
Yes.
I mean, you can picture this little snail just kind of slowly moving along, and in comparison, All the other animals are scurrying right onto the ark, but he keeps going and he eventually gets to where he wants to be. And that's the way anything in life is, and certainly being an artist. You just have to keep working at it. But that doesn't mean you can't ask for help. And whether that's asking somebody to refer you to somebody else, or a conversation like this where you find out how another artist functions and creates their art, or anything else. The worst thing we are all lone wolves as artists. It's the nature of the work.
Yeah, I think so.
I can't get work done if there's other people around. I could certainly never share a studio with anybody. But that doesn't mean you don't need to be out in times other than COVID, out in the art community. And when you talk to other artists, that can get your creative juices going. You can learn things and everything else. But also, if you're thinking about doing something and you don't really know how to go about it, yes, you can Google it and you can read stuff. But if you know an artist who's accomplished the same thing, contact them and ask them questions. Because most artists are more than happy to answer any questions, because we know how hard it is to do stuff. And just because you ask for help and learn a little faster about something doesn't mean you don't have to continue to persevere and keep working.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that your problems are all solved and it's just going to be like,
right. It just helps you. You don't have to be a snail the whole time. It helps you a little further along.
Oh, that is just an awesome quote. I'm going to have to tell my son that one because he loves snails. It was like I want to say spring when when it's kind of wet and the little snails all come out in our yard. He just loves it. They're like his little friends, and he'll go out and sit on the porch and talk to his friends.
Well, I'm going to show my age. When I think of snails, I always think of the Twilight Zone, where, and I don't remember the premise of the whole story or anything, but it turns out in this basement were living people that had become snails. Oh. And when the characters went down in this basement and they saw this, wide silvery trail, like snails leave that slime that glows or whatever. And so that's always the image I get with snails, which is, I guess, kind of good in my mind, because it's, even we big snails will get there. And I like the idea of leaving a silver trail all behind me, going all over the place.
Leaving your mark.
Right, exactly.
That's so funny. Oh my goodness. So speaking of, continuing to learn, what is your favorite art book?
Well, as I mentioned, Van Gogh's Letters is a great one. The Wayne Thiebaud book is really good because it not only shows his graphic drawings, but drawings in oil pastel and other graphic mediums like that. Yeah. But whatever art book I'm looking at the moment is my favorite, because I can always learn from it. And that's another reason I will sign up for webinars and things, and why I've gone to conferences in the past, because I figure if I can go to something like that and I come away with even one new thing that I didn't know before, it's worth it. Yeah. Now, I'll have to admit, all webinars are not created equal, because so many people who do them, and I don't do them, so I'm not casting aspersions on these people. This is just what I think. It drives me wild to get on a webinar and the people spend 25 minutes talking about all the things they've done, why you need to be on the webinar with them and that kind of thing.
Like we've already bought into the webinar. Let's move on along.
Right. This is not why I signed up for this. I want to learn what you know.
Yeah.
Specifically, tell me how you do things. Don't tell me what you've done. If I didn't know the kind of things you'd already done, I wouldn't have signed up for the webinar. You don't need to tell me again. And I watched one last week that was fantastic. I mean, she hit the ground running and
Nice.
told you lots of things that would help you with social media things. And it was fantastic. I don't like wasting my time. And I feel like it's a waste of time when I sign up for an hour webinar that's supposed to at least teach you one or two things. And half of it is spent telling all about the leaders.
Yeah, they're like, this is look at me, what I've done. And you already got that part of it.
Right. And it's one reason I really don't watch many videos on, if it's somebody I like, somebody I know, something I want to know more about, I'll take the time to watch a video. Otherwise, give me a written transcript because I can read faster than most people in videos get around to saying what I want to hear.
Yeah, really.
If I watch 10, 15-minute videos all day, I wouldn't get anything else done. But if I can read something, I can kind of skim through everything and get to the meat of what I want to find out about.
Speaking of, how do you manage your time as an artist? How do you stay focused and get the work done?
Well, because you learn early on, if you sit and don't work, it ain't going to get done. You're not going to have drawings finished to show anybody, forget about somebody who wants to buy it. And as I said before, because pen and ink is such a labor intensive medium and you have to focus so hard on what you're doing and you're focus on what you're actually doing. But as you're doing it, you think, okay, I've added this layer line, so over here I need to come back in and make this darker and that. So you're also thinking ahead. Mm-hmm. And I find myself stopping to take a break and I'll sit there looking at it and thinking, okay, once I've done all these other things when I come back, then I'm going to need to do this. So it's a constant thinking about the process and what I need to do. And because of that, I'll work an hour and a half, 2 hour increments, maybe 2.5, and take a 30-minute break. Mm-hmm. I've tried 15-minute breaks, and that's just not enough time to let your mind rest.
Relax, yeah.
Then I go back and do the same again. And it depends if, like today is going to be my errand day, because usually I get up and after I eat breakfast, try to go ahead and get my first 2 hours of drawing in, because that does set the tone for the day. Yeah. And since I was doing this morning, I thought, okay, this is a good day to do errands. But I usually try to draw at least an hour, even on errand days, because today it's going to be even more tiring because it's the rain and out and that stuff. Yeah. But I don't beat myself up if I go today without drawing at all. I know that I get more done when I can count on spending at least 2 days, preferably 3 or 4 days in a row at home, because I get that rhythm going, get up and draw, take a lunch break, draw, break to exercise, which I try to do every day because that makes me sleep better at night, which means I get better rest. And so I'm better to start the next day with this concentrated work. So I know that I'm doing the very best that I can at any given time. But I will say I'm no different than any other artist. That little voice will say, okay, your client isn't going to like this. This isn't good enough. And, that's the devil getting in there. And trying to convince you otherwise. And it's just not so. So I just remind myself, okay, this is the very best I can do at this point in time.
Yeah.
And capture those bad thoughts and boot them out of the way. So, I think all artists have a lot of insecurity when it comes to showing other people your work, even though that's the whole process. You create and you show it, you create and you show it. But there's always that insecurity, fear of what if they don't like it?
Yeah.
No matter, it's I think a lifelong battle.
Oh yeah. I think that part of it never ends. Like if you're a young artist and you're thinking, oh, when I get into my 40s, 50s, 60s, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be confident. It still happens. That still happens. I've gone through that cycle. I don't know how many times where I'll be like, oh, this is wonderful. I did a great job. And then the very next day I'm like, that isn't wonderful.
Right. You do. When you're working, even if you're taking the breaks, you get used to seeing it. And when you come back to start the next morning working on where you left off the day before, you think, ooh, I really need to take care of this spot. And the things jump out at you, which is another reason to take longer, the 30-minute break between things. Because when you come back, you'll notice things that you might not have noticed. When I think I'm finished with the drawing, I take 2 or 3 days to fine tune them. And what I mean by that is I don't necessarily, I've read, put it up someplace where you wouldn't ordinarily see it. I just don't look at it for a long time. And then I might not look at it the whole first day. And then the second day, I'll look at it and think, ooh, yeah, that white spot has to recede. It can't be all white. That's when things like that really jump out at me.
Yeah.
And so I take a few days to fine tune them so that I don't miss them because I have been looking at it for so long. But I think as time goes on, we never get to the point where we say, well, unless you got a big ego where you say, oh, all my work is great. You get better at capturing those thoughts.
Yeah.
And that's one reason to sit down and do a resume. I did not have a fine art resume when I quit my office job, graphic design resume. And so when you sit down and think about the things you've done and write them down, you'll be amazed at how much more you have accomplished than you thought, because our mind doesn't think in those terms. And so as you go along, if you get in a show, write it down. If you want a prize in that show, write it down. If you get an article or even just an image in a magazine, write it down. I've managed to get my work in several books. Write it down. If you do an interview, write it down. That helps you realize my work is good enough. These people wouldn't accept it in a show. These people wouldn't put it in a book.
Yeah.
These people wouldn't want to talk to me if I wasn't doing something right. So you get better at realizing you have accomplished a lot. And of course, as you get older, just because you've lived longer and because you've lived longer, you've done accomplish more, then I think it is easier to kind of conquer over the insecurities.
Yeah. You're like, man, I've done a lot.
Yeah. And it's very satisfying because we are our own worst critics. By the nature of the insecurities, we tell ourselves, oh, this isn't good enough. I shouldn't bother to enter it in the show, or the client's not going to like this, and that kind of thing. We've got to nip that in the bud and not pay as much attention to it as we do. You don't ever want to get to the point, like I said, with a big ego and think you can do no wrong. Because that's not true either.
Yeah, that's not possible.
But you certainly want to see more of the things that you've accomplished and that have made you a better artist than you want to believe oh, this is awful, because it's not, because if you're always striving the best you can do at the moment, it's like making decisions in life. Well, what if I make the wrong decision? What if? If you get all the information that you can, the pros and the cons, and you make the decision based on that, you've made the best decision you can at that point in time.
Yeah.
And if you are creating the best work you can create at any point in time, which is what any artist's aim should be, you don't want to do mediocre work, not if your mind's in the right place anyway. So, it's just everything takes time and everything takes practice. Most of the time, practice does not make perfect. That quote is not quite true, but it makes better and better and better.
Yeah.
I myself am a recovering perfectionist and always will be.
Yeah.
And I say that because most artists, when you read in a book or a magazine article, the intimidation factor of a white, clean sheet of paper, that's...
I got over that real fast. I don't know how, but I did.
Right. You just have to start and go. And if you're doing your best, that's all anybody, including yourself, can ask.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're too hard on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with the internet too, I think younger artists are very compared, like they're just compare themselves. Yeah. And I mean, you're comparing yourself to somebody across the globe. I mean, and it just could be so overwhelming.
And that doesn't do any good. I keep harping on doing the best work you can. Every person does something different. Mm-hmm. Every painter that you see on social media has their own unique something with their work. So it does no good to compare. Mm-mm. And it's better to think, is this the best work that I can do?
Yeah.
Rather than, how does my work compare to this artist's work? Because there is no comparison. You're you, they are them, and it's comparing apples and oranges most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. They have completely different life experience, everything. So, I mean, it's just pointless. And you really should be looking at your own, like, for me personally, I look at my past work, and that's what I'm comparing to what I'm doing now. Is I'm thinking, okay, where have I been? Where do I want to go? And looking at my own stuff versus where I can enjoy other people's art, but I'm not necessarily going to be like, oh, they're just so much better than me.
The only good reason to, as a working artist, to look at somebody else's work is if you see in their work something they've managed to accomplish that you haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you can see in their work how they managed to make it work, then incorporate it in your work. But when you do that, you're making it your own. You're not copying what they're doing. And the best thing you can do is what you said, look at your older work. What in that older work that you can see now needed improvement? What part of it? What aspect of it? And okay, in this new work, have I succeeded in doing that? Mm-hmm. Just as a natural process, even if I wasn't consciously thinking that this is what needed to be done.
Yeah.
That's how you grow.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the whole really definition of an artist's journey, is the growing and learning and just taking it one step at a time, Right.
Snail's pace.
Yes. I'm going to remember that forever. Oh, that was so good.
It's just such a wonderful mental image.
Yes,
everybody can picture that and how slow a snail moves. So.
I look picturing these tiny little bitty snails on my front porch. Oh my goodness.
And think about how long it takes one of those little snails to make it across your porch.
I know. Poor little snail. Oh my goodness. So where can we find your work? Do you have any events or anything coming up?
Because of this project, well, in addition to COVID, there haven't been that many shows or anything. I have been in group shows here in Montgomery at Stonehenge Gallery. Now that I'm no longer in the museum shop. But you can find my work at Stonehenge. And if you go in there and they don't have any exhibit, they call me and I'll bring some over or something. As far as physical locations, that and my home, my studio's in my home, and all. But you can always email me or direct message me, or if you've got my phone number, you can text me or call me. But I don't answer numbers that I don't know. So if you don't leave a voicemail, you're not going to hear from me. And if you have my phone number and you text me, please start off saying, "Hi, this is April Harris." Because I have friends who just start a conversation and I don't have a clue who they are because just the telephone number shows.
Well, I immediately say, "Who is this?"
Right. So, and you can, like I said, you can Google my name, or you can go specifically to Etsy. If you go to my website, I do have a gallery page. And if you see something you want to buy, you can contact me.
Do you do prints of everything, or just certain things you have prints of?
I primarily do prints of things that I think people would truly be interested in buying. I did my illustrated alphabet, and that's been very popular. So I do note cards of that, and I do prints if people want prints. Those have been real popular note cards. I did illustrated numbers, and the same goes there. I've done prints of the Bib Graves drawing because that's been popular with people in this area. And Toomer's Drugstore. And the Rolled Oaks, that's particularly popular in football season. So it's things like that. And I've had people message me or email me or whatever and say, "Would you do a print of this?" And if a drawing they've seen or something, and if it's a drawing I've already done, sure. But I'm not necessarily going to do a drawing unless I see it as something that would be a good seller as a print. Unless you commission me to do something like that.
Thank you so much for talking to me today. This was so much fun. And you have so much wisdom for all of us. So
well, thank you.
we got into some really interesting details.
Well, I hope so. And I hope people, when they watch, that they will learn something. Else there was no point in us doing this. And that's what's so good about artists talking with each other about their processes. So
it's always interesting just to hear how somebody else sort of thinks about what they're doing and how they accomplish it,
Well, I appreciate your inviting me to do this. Thank you very much.
It's so nice to have talked to you.
Thank you for listening to Art Talk with April. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe.